recently we had a article in Financial Times. It says that a senior Western official says that Ukraine is in the middle of this war. And just recently, General Mike Milley, in an interview to CNN, said that I can tell you, I'm quoting him, I can tell you that it will take a considerable length of time to militarily eject all 200,000 plus Russian soldiers from occupied territories of Ukraine. If Ukraine is in the middle of this war, what would be the end for Ukraine?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that General Milley, his statements are geared to support and reflect official U.S. policy, which means it's not reflecting reality. He's a man who continues to stand before the American public and say without blushing that Ukraine has penetrated several layers of the Russian defense. A totally misleading, dishonest statement. Ukraine has done no such thing. The middle of the war, the reason why they're saying this now, and the reason why they speak about a long war, is because they recognize that Ukrainian counteroffensive has failed. But what they're not telling the American public is that the Ukrainian army has been destroyed. It has lost combat effectiveness, and that this war is not. You're not in the middle of this war. You're nearing the end game of this war, and this war will end with the total defeat of Ukraine. This is the reality. So any talk about evicting Russia is just fantasy. It's politicized nonsense. It's language designed to continue to justify pouring billions of dollars into a failed effort. But it's not the truth.
If that's not the fact, why General Mike Milley is saying that?
And the reason why he's saying this is because his commander-in-chief has instructed him to say this. Mark Milley's job is twofold. Behind closed doors, he is to provide military advice to the President of the United States. In front of the public, he is to support the policies of the United States. And the policies of the United States are at this juncture to support Ukraine and to create the conditions that allow Ukraine to achieve their stated objectives of evicting Russia from territory currently occupied by Russia. You can't accomplish this if you tell the American people the truth, because then the American people will lose heart, won't allow $113 billion to be sent to Ukraine. So what you do is you bend facts, you manufacture facts, you tell lies. Have Ukrainian forces crossed the first line of defense? And the answer is yes, they have. Ukrainian infantry forces have crossed over the first line of dragon's teeth obstacles. They've penetrated, then they died. That's what happens when you cross the dragon's teeth. No armored vehicles has crossed the dragon teeth. Why do dragon's teeth exist? To stop infantry? Nope. To stop armor, to stop Ukrainian tanks, Ukrainian infantry fighting vehicles. No Ukrainian armor has penetrated the dragon's teeth. So for General Milley to say this is it's misleading, it's disingenuous, it's a straight out lie. The other thing that he's not saying is that doctrinally, the first line of defense should have been breached on day 2 or day 3 of this offensive. We're into the 3rd month, and Ukrainian infantry have crossed over one part of the first line of defense before being killed. General Milley needs to be honest that this counteroffensive has failed. If you study Russian defensive doctrine, especially the current iteration of it that's been promulgated by Lieutenant General Alexander Romanchuk, the first line of defense is not the Alamo. Any American will know what I'm talking about. The last line of defense, we're going to fight and die here on this line. The first line of defense is meant to be breached. It's designed to be breached. The Ukrainians are supposed to breach it because the Russians are shaping the battlefield. They've designed their obstacle belts, their minefields. Every aspect of the defense is designed to funnel the Ukrainians into a corridor that the Russians choose that leads to the first line of defense. The Russians have chosen that spot to have them break through and head to the second line of defense that the Russians have chosen. And then the Russians counterattack, pinch off the base of the bulge and slaughter all the Ukrainians in there. Ukrainians are doing everything the Russians have intended them to do. General Miley's not saying that, because then again, if he said that to the American people would say, well, then Ukraine has lost this war. Why are we continuing to support them?
Anthony Blinken, in an interview with Jake Tapper on CNN, said Ukraine has had a real success over the past year. Ukrainians have taken more than 50% of the territory seized by Russians since February 2022. Why he's talking about February 2022? He's manipulating. It seems to me that he's manipulating the subject in order to give some achievement, some accomplishment for Ukrainians. How do you see this?
Well, I mean, that's exactly what you said. Look, when Russia first moved into Ukraine in the opening stages of the special military operation, they seized significant territories: Kherson, Zaporizhia, large parts of Donetsk, all of Lugansk. They moved into Kharkov province, into Sumy. They came down through Kiev, almost surrounding Kiev. In the negotiations that took place in March, leading up to the potential, what should have been a peace agreement that would have been signed on 1 April 2022 in Istanbul, Russia agreed to withdraw forces from Ukraine as a good faith measure to show the Ukrainians that they were serious. And so they withdrew from Kiev. They weren't kicked out by the Ukrainians. Russia withdrew. They withdrew from Sumy, and they were preparing to withdraw from Kharkov. They began withdrawing significant forces from the Kharkov area. When Boris Johnson rolled in and said, nope, no deal, we'll stop supporting you if you sign this. So Ukraine opted to go on. Then the Ukrainians used $45 billion given to them by the United States, additional money given to them by NATO, to rebuild an army with NATO assistance. They launched a counterattack against the Kharkov area, against the Russian forces, half of whom had already left. And yes, they had successes. They pushed the Russians out of Kharkov, and the Russians have consolidated on their current defensive positions that roughly match the border of Lugansk and the part of Donetsk that the Russians occupy. The Ukrainians were also able to take the right bank of Kherson, which was very difficult for the Russians to defend given the situation. This territory has been reclaimed, but most of that, if you add up the square kilometers of the 50% of that was voluntarily withdrawn by the Russians, and the stuff that was captured in the fall offensive, at what cost? It gutted the Ukrainian army. But he's giving this in a sentence where he's talking about the current counteroffensive. See, he's trying to spin the fact that if you take a look at the territory that Ukraine has captured today, it's 1%. 1%. That's a failure. But in order to make 1% look good, he has to manipulate the data. So he speaks about all the territory that Russia has acquired since February of 2022. But then even then, he can't tell the truth, because he fails to acknowledge that much of that territory is voluntarily evacuated by Russia as part of a good faith measure leading up to what should have been a peace treaty that had brought an end to this war. Tony Blinken is a liar, a distorter, a manufacturer of data. And that's a shame, because he's the Secretary of State of the United States, and one would have hoped for a modicum of integrity from Japan.
The US State Department said that Putin wanted the glory of Russian Empire. Do we have any evidence that he's looking after the Russian Empire?
No, we have evidence the exact opposite. Again, if you take a look at the peace agreement that was supposed to have been signed on 1 April, what the Russians were willing to do is return Kherson, return Zaporizhia to Ukraine, return all of the territory that they had occupied since February of 2024 or 2022. On the issue of the Donbass, what they said is that Russia will withdraw from the Donbass, but that the final disposition of the Donbass will be determined by a referendum overseen by the international community, so that the people of the Donbass could decide, do they want to be independent? Do they want to be part of Ukraine? Do they want to be part of Russia? Is this what you do if you want to resurrect the Soviet Union? No, it's the exact opposite. The last thing that Vladimir Putin is trying to do is resurrect the Soviet Union. What he is trying to do is allow Russia to rise to the stature that it should enjoy in the international community, given the size of it, given the resources, given its culture, given its history. And this is resented by the West. The West, because Vladimir Putin has refused to keep Russia down. The Russia he inherited in 1999 was a destroyed nation, a nation on the verge of total collapse. Vladimir Putin will go down in history as one of the greatest Russian leaders ever because of what he has done to lead Russia out of the abyss to where Russia is today. Russia today is a great nation, a nation with a booming economy where social services have been restored, pensioners receive their pension, healthcare is provided, quality healthcare, where there's food on the shelves, people have employment, gainful employment. It's a modern state. This is all because of Vladimir Putin's leadership. But what the West has done is said, well, we didn't want that. We wanted a Russia that was destroyed, lying prostrate at our feet, totally dependent upon us. And so we mischaracterize what Vladimir Putin has done as a resurrection of the Soviet Union. No, it's simply bringing Russia to the level that Russia deserves to be at as one of the world's leading countries.
Is Putin begging Kim Jong-un for help, as the U.S. State Department stated?
No, absolutely not. What Putin is doing is reflecting the reality that U.S. sanctions policy has failed, and that he is not going to allow the United States to reap any benefits from the sanctions policy. Putin is being a good neighbor to North Korea. And what Putin has done is basically said that the sanctions no longer apply, that Russia and North Korea will engage in economic intercourse, and that some of this engagement will include technology that can be used to launch satellites. Some of this will be used technology related to the military. But the bottom line is that the border is open. Russia is open for business. North Korea is open for business. This isn't about Putin panicking and begging Kim Jong-un to sell him ammunition.
How do you see the current phase of war? Because General Mike Milley is talking about the winter counteroffensive. Are we going to have some sort of battle in the winter?
If this war is continuing in the winter, then yes, we will have a battle in the winter. The war isn't over. The conflict isn't over. I think General Milley might want to focus on the fact that the Ukrainian army today has been effectively rendered combat ineffective by the large number of casualties it has suffered. Nations are starting to turn their back on Ukraine. Poland is turning its back on Ukraine. Germany is, you have prominent personalities in Germany talking about the need for a peace treaty that deviates dramatically from the demands of Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president. You have the United States beginning to question whether or not it's in the American interest to continue funding this conflict. And you have Zelensky being challenged at home. His political future is very much in doubt. You have a Ukrainian army that's being defeated on the battlefield. Yes. Are the Ukrainians able to mobilize people? Yes, similar to what the Nazis did at the end of the Second World War, where they mobilized the young children, where they mobilized the old men, where they mobilized the infirm, the ill, those who would normally not pass muster. So can he mobilize another 100,000 people? Absolutely, but they will not turn the tide. They will die. I think the big question right now isn't just when will the Ukrainian army collapse, and I again argue that will be sooner rather than later, but when will the Ukrainian government collapse? We are looking at the potential of political collapse in Ukraine, where Zelensky is evicted from power. And then the question is who will replace him and what will their intentions be regarding the termination of this conflict.
You see, as Ukrainians are getting poorer in this war, these oligarchs, Ukrainian oligarchs, are getting richer. How this war is benefiting these oligarchs?
Well, the oligarchs that are supporting the Zelensky government are part of the most corrupt, political system in Europe, in the world. Fully 60% of the military assistance that's been provided by the United States to Ukraine ends up going into the pockets of these oligarchs of Zelensky. Seymour Hersh, a very well-known journalist, has said that the U.S. government believes that Zelensky has embezzled $400 million of this U.S. aid, and others in his government have similarly embezzled hundreds of millions of dollars. That's how the oligarchs get rich. They get rich because they get contracts. The defense minister was compelled to resign because of outrage over uh, the provision of low quality food to Ukrainian soldiers. He had received a significant money. He was supposed to provide a balanced meal. Instead, according to one video I saw on Telegram where they opened up one of these rations. You open up the ration and what the Ukrainians got were two whole fish, salted it looked like, a dozen crayfish live. How do you send live crayfish to the front line? And then some bay leaves to use to, I guess, boil the crayfish. But that's not a meal. That's not healthy. And he pocketed this money, and his crimes were exposed. But now he's been, he resigned, but then he got appointed ambassador to the United Kingdom, where he will safely hide his money in British banks, and he will continue corruption. All Ukrainian officials are corrupt, and that's how the oligarchs benefit from this war, by stealing the money that U.S. taxpayers and European taxpayers through their governments are sending to Ukraine. 60% of the money that's sent to Ukraine to assist Ukraine in this conflict is being stolen or diverted by government officials, by bureaucrats, by soldiers. It's not doing what it was intended to do.
It seems that the U.S. is considering sending Atacm missile to Ukraine. Is that going to be influential? Is it going to change anything on the battlefield, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, the ATACMS system is a capable system. It would allow Ukraine to reach deeper into the Russian rear area with precision, so that the reality is, if Ukraine receives the ATACMS missile, hundreds, if not thousands, of Russians will die. But it won't change the outcome of this war. Ukraine is still going to lose. The ATACMS won't alter that. What it will do is probably increase the harm done to Ukraine as Russia retaliates by striking decision centers and other critical infrastructure that Russia has so far held back from attacking. If Ukraine begins to strike Russia proper, I think you're going to see the Russian target list become much more expansive and result in much more harm to Ukraine and the Ukrainian people.
One of the most important supporters of Ukraine in this war was Poland, and is Poland still, I think. And now we're seeing that there are some disagreements between Poland and Ukraine. They were planning to have a meeting at the UN, but and Zelensky canceled that meeting. How do you see this interaction between Poland and Ukraine?
Well, I think it's going to be fatal for Ukraine. Poland was one of their largest supporters. Poland provided a tremendous amount of military equipment. Poland facilitates logistics. Polish troops were being dispatched to Ukraine, where they served under the Ukrainian flag, tens of thousands of Polish troops. And there was a lot of talk that Zelensky and Duda were engaged in discussions on opening the border between Poland and Western Ukraine, coming up with some sort of customs union, things of that nature that would link Poland with Ukraine. Now that appears to all have gone away. Poland says that we will provide no more military assistance to Ukraine. All of our military capability will be dedicated to building up the Polish military potential. And I think this is going to have an effect on Europe's willingness to continue to support. If Poland is questioned, and Poland's a frontline state with a lot of skin in the game, if Poland is questioning it, why would Germany seek to double down? Why would France seek to double down? I think you're going to see that this will lead to a lot of Europe begin to question the level of support they have for Ukraine and the Ukrainian people.
We saw that when Biden was addressing at the UN, he was talking about we are supporting Ukraine. But when you look at the Zelensky's face, in his face, you just see the sadness. Is there anything behind the scene? They're talking about something different behind the scene. How do you see this? Why he was so sad?
It shows that maybe he's human after all. You are the president of the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian military that suffered over 400,000 dead. You've suffered 71,000 casualties in the current counteroffensive alone. You've accomplished nothing. all of the magic weapons that have been provided you by the West have failed on the battlefield, being destroyed one after the other. And the West is starting to lose faith in Ukraine. I think the future is very bleak, and there's no reason for him to be anything other than tremendously melancholy about the fate, his own personal fate, and the fate of Ukraine.
He's advocating for the continuation of this war in the hope that one day Ukraine gonna take all this territory occupied by Russians. Is it possible, in your opinion?
Well, it's a political statement. He has to make this statement so that he can continue to justify or allow other nations to justify pouring good money after bad into Ukraine. The bottom line is, all the expectations that Ukraine had, that the West had about this counteroffensive, have been dashed, and people are starting to question why they continue to support Ukraine. And so it's up to Zelensky to convince people that that this is possible, that it's not an impossible task. But at the end of the day, he has to say what his masters want him to say. He can't tell the truth about what's going on. He knows what the truth is, but he can't tell the truth. Because if he tells the truth, he'll be eviscerated politically at home, and the West will turn their back on him. So he has to continue to play the lie, to live the lie, to speak the lie.
It's impossible to sustain this sort of casualty.
Well, this is why Ukraine will not win the war. They don't have infinite resources, either manpower or materiel. They've run out of manpower. They're now scraping the bottom of the barrel. This war is, killing 800 to 1,000, or causing 800, creating 800 to 1,000 casualties per day. It's unsustainable, and it's a self-solving problem. If this war continues at this scope and scale, Ukraine's demise is inevitable. There's nothing that can be done to reverse it.
How do you see the US foreign policy so far? Right now, it's so crucial. I think Biden has a choice to continue this war or go after negotiations with Russians.
Well, I believe the United States will continue to provide Ukraine with military assistance, economic assistance, so long as Ukraine is willing to continue the fight. To the last Ukrainian is a statement has been made by several people, Democrat and Republican alike. And so, if Ukraine is continuing to put up a viable defense against Russia, the United States will continue to underwrite that, to fund it. But at some point in time, reality is going to hit home. Ukraine has lost this war, and the United States is going to have to adjust to that defeat. It will be painful, but it's entirely possible. Remember, back in June and July of 2021, the United States was talking about, leaving Afghanistan, leaving a pro-American government in place, and then, what the long-term strategy would be there. All those planning assumptions went out the window. The Taliban are now in control of Afghanistan. The U.S. adapted to that reality. And it doesn't mean just because the U.S. suffered a strategic defeat that the U.S. is strategically defeated. It's still very powerful. With Ukraine, it's the same thing. At some point in time, we're going to be compelled to make the decision that Ukraine is lost to us. And at that point in time, we will cut and run, we will leave.
It seems that there is a disagreement between the Biden administration and the Congress.
I think what we're seeing right now is, we're in the opening stages of what I call the American political silly season, meaning we're getting ready to nominate people for the respective party nominations, and then we move into debates. We have the primaries, and then we move into the general election. And so right now there's a lot of posturing taking place. The Republicans are trying to build on the failure of the Biden administration to adequately respond to disasters, whether it be the hurricane in Florida or the fire in Maui. And in order to do that, they have to have something to contrast this failure with. In Maui, they jump on the fact that the Biden administration only provided $700 of relief per person. And yet, Biden has given $113 billion to Ukraine. And so Republicans are saying, hey, that money could have been used to save Maui. That money could have been used to repair the damage done by hurricane. So this is a political thing. And so I think you see that McCarthy is articulating policies, not one more dime, that are a way of creating a distance between him and Joe Biden. But again, I strongly believe that U.S. government will not shut down, and therefore a compromise will be made over Ukraine funding. But this is the beginning of the end. Yes, I believe that this current bill will pass. I think Ukraine's going to get all the money they asked for, not all the equipment. I don't think Ukraine will get ATACMS missiles, but they'll get the money. The money will be expended. They'll get the munitions they want minus ATACMS. But then this is it. There's nothing left to give them, and this means that Ukraine will fail. I think that this failure is manifest. I believe anybody who assesses Ukraine understands this failure, that there will not be a recovery, which means that the Biden administration is this is it. McCarthy's not going to, they'll get their money now, but this is it. They're not going to get money going forward.
How did you find the G20 summit? Putin and Xi didn't participate in G20. Is it going to continue being an important summit, or the power of G20 going to diminish over time?
Well, it stopped being an important summit for Russia and China. If it was an important summit, then Russia and China would have attended. They didn't attend because, I mean, at the head of state level, because it's no longer important. The important summit to them is BRICS. BRICS is the important summit. That's the future. Remember what the G20 is. The G20 was formed in 1999 as a tool of the G7. The G7 created the G20 as a way to project G7 policies into the global South, to control the development of the undeveloped world, to make sure that this G20 bought into the rules-based international order. So these mechanisms of control could be inserted. That's what it is. You know what isn't that? BRICS. BRICS is totally independent of the G7. In fact, BRICS views the G7 as an opponent, and BRICS has said that they are more powerful and influential than the G7. BRICS just expanded. Many of the nations that are part of BRICS and part of the expansion are also part of the G20. So is BRICS going to compete against itself by trying to make it viable and the G20 viable? No. The G20 is a defeated organization, and you're going to see over time that its relevance will dissipate, and the G20 itself will probably disappear as soon as BRICS completes maybe the second round or third round of expansion.
We had more African countries participating in this G20 summit. It seems to me that they are following BRICS. How do you see their policy considering Africa? Are they going to take into consideration what has happened in Africa, in Niger, to invite more African countries, or are they following BRICS? How do you see this?
Well, again, the African Union is a creation of neocolonialism. It's a mechanism designed to make the African continent believe it has a voice, but it's totally dependent upon and subordinated to Western interests. And so to invite the African Union into the G20 is a logical step, especially given the fact that BRICS just came off of a very successful summit held in South Africa, where the theme of it was the development of the African continent. I think you're going to see going forward that BRICS is going to be the major player in Africa. The G20 will not be the major player in Africa. And we see, yes, the African Union's there, but we just saw a new military alliance be formed between Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. One attack against one is an attack against all. And I am going to gamble and say that one by one, the other Western African nations of the Sahel that are currently part of this ECOWAS system are going to be breaking free of ECOWAS and joining this new alliance, because the new alliance represents a divorce from France, a divorce from French neocolonial policies, and in many ways a divorce from the United States. And I think that's the direction the African continent is heading, a rejection of neocolonialism, rejection of American neoliberalism, and an embrace of sovereignty.
It seems that Russia and China are talking about a new military alliance between them. Do you think that it's serious? They had this opportunity to do this alliance for a long time, but they didn't do that. Why they're talking about this right now?
Well, first of all, I don't think they're talking about an alliance. They're talking about an expansion of cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, both Putin and Xi Jinping have spoken of the friendship between Russia and China as more powerful than any alliance. An alliance, in many ways, is limiting because the alliance defines the scope and scale of what the cooperation will be. When you don't have an alliance, there's no artificial expectations. Witness Armenia right now waiting for the CSTO to ride to their rescue. It's not going to happen. But wait a minute, Armenia says, we're a member of the CSTO. Why aren't they coming to our assistance? Because the alliance isn't what you thought it was. So neither Russia nor China are going to allow their very complex relationship to be defined by a treaty. What it is they're being defined by issues that are of mutual benefit. Russia and China still disagree on a whole host of issues, but they are expanding their relationship on the issues that count, including the war in Ukraine, including what America's doing vis-a-vis Taiwan. So, I don't see an alliance. I see something stronger than an alliance. This is what Russia has talked about, that what's coming out of its relationship with China is a friendship that goes well beyond what any alliance could provide. Now, is this friendship sustainable? What happens if one of these presidents dies? Because this is very much a personality-driven posture. But the fact is, the more Russia and China work to integrate their economies, the more likely it is that whoever replaces either Putin or Xi Jinping down the road will continue the policies of the present.
And she invited Putin for the Belt and Road Forum, and Putin gonna be there in China in October. How important is this forum in your opinion?
Belts and Roads Initiative is one of the most important initiatives of our time. It's basically allowing China to assert itself globally and allowing the world to carry out this transition away from being subservient to an American singularity, instead to become vital partners in a new multipolar reality. That's all thanks to the Belts and Roads Initiative. So I think you're going to see Russia working with China to sustain and expand the global infrastructure development that is accrued from the Belts and Roads Initiative.
And we've seen that Assad, president of Syria, is going to China after 2 decades. It seems to me that it's so important. After 2 decades, he's going to China. How do you find this new player, Syria, going to China? Because Syria was supported by Russia and Iran, and they were supporting the government of Syria. Now he was invited to China. How do you find this?
Well, look, let's be straight up. It was Russia that saved Bashar al-Assad. If Russia hadn't intervened in September of 2015, the black flag of the Islamic State of al-Qaeda would have flown over Damascus. Bashar al-Assad knows this. He knows what Russia did for him, and I imagine he's eternally grateful. But one of the problems confronting China is that of economic development, to rebuild in the aftermath of this conflict. There needs to be new opportunities, new technologies, new money, and this is why he's going to China to get the Belts and Roads Initiative extended into Syria, so that Syria can more effectively rebuild itself. Syria suffered a lot of damage at the hands of rebel factions, and Syria it's been affected by drought, by COVID, etc. It needs to reimagine itself, and it can only do that with a significant investment in the Belts and Roads Initiative is probably the most effective vehicle for that investment.
And I want to ask you a different question. If you were the president of the United States right now, what would you do in Ukraine in Ukraine and even in Taiwan to resolve the problems between the US and China and Russia?
My approach would be designed to make sure that America remains relevant, that we're viewed as a relevant power. Right now, we're headed to defeat on both, and once you're defeated, you become less relevant. Let's start with Taiwan. It's the easiest one. I would go to Taiwan, and I would sit down with the Taiwanese president and the Taiwanese legislature, and I would say, when America speaks of a one China policy, we're serious about a one China policy. And so I'm here to tell you, without any ifs, ands, or buts, it is the American policy that you be reunited with China. And we want to make this happen. But we also want to protect you as much as possible. So now I'm going to leave Taipei and I'm going to fly to Beijing, where I'm going to sit down with Xi Jinping and said, how can we make this happen? How can we stop this mad rush to war? How can we reunite Taiwan with China so that there's strong autonomy in Taiwan to protect the jobs, protect the lifestyle, the culture, etc. Help me help you. Let's make this happen. And what you've just done in one stroke of the pen is you've made yourself relevant to China now, because the reunification of Taiwan with China is one of the most important issues for China. And since now the United States has become the most important element in making this happen, China's going to have to pay attention to us on all issues, so that when we start talking about free trade relations, supply chain issues, etc., China won't ignore us, because we've helped China out of a very difficult problem. And for Russia, this is something Russia would fear, because now what we're doing is luring China away from Russia. But then I would fly to Moscow and I would tell Putin that we're not your enemy. Don't be afraid of what we're doing in China. We're not trying to drive a wedge between you and China. In fact, we encourage you to cooperate with China economically, but we want to be a part of it. How can we come in and invest in this? How can we make this a mutually beneficial thing? Oh, by the way, in Ukraine, what do you want? Tell me what you want, what your goals and objectives are, and I will do my best to make it happen. This war needs to end now, right now. I will fly to if you tell me what you want and we can commit to it right now. If you can tell me this is what I want in Ukraine, and I walk away and I say, I agree, it will happen. I will make it happen. I will fly to Kiev. I will tell them that this are the terms, that we're going to stop this war, we're going to stop the death, and we're going to stop the destruction. Then I would fly to NATO and tell NATO that NATO needs to adjust to the reality of a Russian victory in Kiev. But because we're now viewing Russia as a partner, we don't view them as an enemy, we can stop this nonsense about building up to 300,000 this, and we could focus on the economic recovery that must take place in Europe. And I believe that if I did all of that, I'd win the damn Nobel Peace Prize.
Sure.